I'm Shivani Gupta. I'm obsessed with small to medium businesses growing. As business owners, we take so much risk and we want to make sure it's worth it. I believe one of the best presents you can give yourself as a business owner is to be able to learn how to scale your people, your profit, and your processes. Welcome to Grow Your Business podcast. I am Shivani Gupta and I am your host. Today, I'm going to be speaking about something that has caused me a lot of pain in terms of personal brand versus business brand, and what is the difference and when to use it. For me, it's a question that I've struggled with till recently, where it became very clear sitting into a couple of workshops, reading a couple of books about this particular topic. And I think when we are founders of our own business, we want to have our personal brand, but we also need to have a business brand. So let's start at the beginning and talk a little bit about the point of brand. And again, I'm not an expert in it, but I just wanted to share with you some of the lessons and learnings that I've had from listening to some experts and reading some books about that. So anytime that we're engaging with the public, we want a brand to be able to communicate, I guess, specific information about yourself or the entity that you represent. So a personal brand and business brand, I guess, two different types of identities that could influence engagement amongst the people that you're trying to get a message across, to be seen by them or get them to take an action as a result of seeing your brand. And when we look at the big brands, I know that everybody talks about the McDonald's and of the world, but we understand what the Golden Arches are. We understand what they do in terms of their charity, and they link that in really well. Now, understanding how personal brand contrasts with a business brand really also helps you with your public identity, but really importantly also then links into what your career objectives and your business objectives might be being. So let's just talk about what is a personal brand, what is a business brand, just to make sure that we are all on the same page. So the first thing is your personal brand. Now, what does a personal brand mean? Well, it basically represents, I guess, a person, because it's the personal brand of that. And it can be really helpful for professionals who want their customers to recognize them as leaders in their fields. So, for example, people that are leaders within other businesses, you absolutely want to have your personal brand, whether you're using LinkedIn or other professional networks in terms of your platform. A lot of people do use LinkedIn. That you want to absolutely make sure that you have a personal brand on areas like LinkedIn when you want customers, perhaps future roles and opportunities that come for you in that. You also want to be able to link in your personal brand so that you can talk to people about certain views that you have, certain conversations that you want to have, perhaps even some communities that you want to create. And so personal brand always involves the individual's name. It emphasizes who they are. It emphasizes what they do. It also communicates, I guess, why consumers can support them and their endeavors. So for me as a speaker and a coach, it's very, very clear to me that I have a personal brand. And now let's talk a little bit about the business brand. So business brand really, I guess, rather than an individual, it represents the business or the organization that they stand for. It's a separate identity from the organizational founders and the employees who work there. Basically, it uses the information for the business, and that's what its purpose is in terms of a business brand. And it can include products and include services and a range of things that you do. It really, for example, a business brand that for a company that sells shoes, it's going to be offered, the brand is going to talk about offering exclusive quality sneakers or, fantastic service. And we've got some amazing examples of that around the world who've built this whole brand around that. I know for my husband, Scott, he often wears Tom's shoes, not because he's vegan, but we're a vegetarian family. And so for him, he loves what that brand stands for. You might not know exactly who started it, who the employees are, and all the details, but that brand talks about what they stand for, their belief systems are, and who then they, support. Now, let's talk about the difference between personal brands and business brands as well. So they can both have a really positive impact on your career and your business, but they actually serve different purposes. So, for example, flexibility. Personal brand is a lot more flexible than a business brand. So if you decide that you're going to be doing job ABC one time and then you're going to be changing it to DEF, well, you can change what you do on a profile like LinkedIn very, very easily. Whereas a business brand has already made a statement in terms of who they are and what they stand for. And so it's a little bit more work to be able to change that brand perception. So consumers welcome the changes, but it may be challenging to change that business brand around that, because consumers, your client base, has got very used to that brand consistently doing the products or the services that they purchase from the company. So if you're going to modify that brand with your services and products, then it takes that little while to be able to do that. It would be like, you know, an Apple company, which are known for technical products and making your life easy, and the interaction that you have with them, and, you know, traditionally doing iPhones, etc. Then completely changing their brand, that they've said, look, we're going to stop doing phones and we're now going to be selling shoes. That brand transfer for a business is much more difficult, but for an individual, it's much more harder. So much more flexibility in terms of how that works. The second thing that we want to speak about is the personality of it. So because the brand, I guess, in essence, symbolizes the person, you want to showcase your personality. So for example, if you write a travel blog, you want to emphasize on the activities that increase your excitement when you see certain things, travel around certain foods that you might experience, the adrenaline that you might experience when you're doing certain activities on that, the cultures that you may be able to consume. So consumers relate to you because you're a human being, and what they're doing is that they want to be just like you, and they can relate to their love of travel, and they can then relate to you as an individual brand. The business brand represents a company, and I guess the personality is a lot harder to convey. So often some brands are fantastic at that because they've really done a lot of their work around exactly who they're targeting, and in a lot of extreme detail. But for you, for a company, it's harder to convey that individual personal brand. So in that, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get, you know, emotions from your audience, because the center of the brand isn't a person. So understanding that personality will come out very differently for a personal brand. The next difference is really a development. So for example, it's very easy to represent yourself in the public than it is to represent your company or your organization. So with the personal brand, you know, the personality and the values that you want to be able to share with your audience, you want to be able to get that out. So for example, if you're an actor, or for me, I'm a speaker, you can, you know, post your professional headshots, and you can then have a social media presence in terms of being able to create that. With a business brand, you've got to think about your identity from the perspective of your customers, not your individual. So you would then, when it comes to the development of that brand, you would want to really look and curating ideas and ways to be able to get your personality of the client, the consumer, that's going to be able to do that. And that often requires quite a bit of research to make sure that your brand, again, then stands out if it's a company brand, and it's very good and easy to be able to communicate what services and products that it does. The other difference that I want to talk about is selling. So although a personal brand is very flexible, it's often not very easy to sell because the brand is you. So unless you're then wanting to get rid of that business, unless you've got certain products, etc., that might need to be reframed, a lot of the times personal brands are really hard to sell. And this really helped me with a particular workshop that I went to that was run by an accountant who was just talking about building a brand in terms of your exit and what it's actually worthwhile building. And so, you know, whereas the company brand, the business brand, is much easier to sell because it actually is symbolizing the company, not the owner. So all the materials that you've published, or the courses, programs, services, products, whatever it might be. And so, for example, if you decide to sell the business, the new owner can actually take control of the brand with that transition, rather than an individually, which is very, very difficult to be able to do and sell your own personal name. So I have run a number of businesses which had a separate brand to my personal brand. And I'm glad that those brands did not have my name associated with it, because it was about building that brand and I was able to exit it. Whereas my other business, if I decide to exit it, there's nobody else that would really be able to take over that particular. So just a couple of last minute tips in terms of building a brand. Always be very, very clear about your purpose. Every single workshop, every book I've read talks about the fact that you want to be very, very clear, represents whether you're personal or professional. You want to know what you stand for and what your purpose is. You also want to really get clear about your target audience. Saying that you're going to be able to service all women or service all teenagers, is not specific enough. Get very, very clear about your target audience. Creating a tagline is really important that becomes memorable in terms of who you are and what you stand for. Building a social media presence is really important. And then having brand materials, whether it's your social media platforms, your newsletters, making sure there's consistency in all the brand materials that you're able to do. So again, putting a disclaimer on there, I am not a brand expert. I've just spent a lot of time and sometimes wasted a lot of money as a founder of my own businesses, where I spent a lot of time and money looking at different brands. And really, in those cases, it really needed a personal brand rather than anything else. But I've also run businesses where you've needed that. So just if it's something particularly for small to medium businesses where that's something that's caused an issue, hopefully that gives you a little bit more clearer understanding in terms of how you might operate that. A lot of people I know have both, but just knowing when your personal brand's in, knowing when your business brand's in. Hope that helped. If you've got any questions, please always shout out. And would love if you could take a moment to review and rate this podcast on Apple. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Shivani Gupta, and you've been listening to the Grow Your Business podcast. I hope you got one idea that you can think about or perhaps even implement straight away in your business. Thank you for listening. Follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn under Ask Shivani. Remember, I call it Ask Shivani, so please send me your questions that I can address in this podcast for you. And I would also so appreciate if you went to the Apple Podcast to rate and review this podcast.